Chapter 7. The Food Chain. Outside Tinker's cottage, on the outskirts of the small English town, a well-to-do voice cut through the evening air. "Bernard," Mrs. Marion Grace called anxiously, "I've got people to see and things to do." A woman in her late 60s, with salt and pepper hair, was wearing a dark green knee-length skirt, white blouse, and a navy cardigan fastened by a golden kingfisher brooch. An extremely dusty apron hung around her waist, and a pair of bright pink Crocs completed her look. As she ventured along her vast, winding gravel path in search of her beloved Persian cat, the small odd-shaped stones crunched underneath her colourful footwear. She shook a small red box of classy kitty kibble, with a picture of a cat wearing a top hat and a monocle. She thought the world of her cat. She bought him only the best food, and religiously brushed the tangles out of his fur. She took him to the vet recently, insisting that he was depressed, only to be insulted when the vet told her that was just the way he looked. Momentarily she stopped, frantically shaking the cat food, and listened. A quieter but similar crunching noise could be heard moving towards her. "Is that you, Bernard? Come along, you've had me worried to death." With the bout of cat disappearances in the area, every cat owner was on red alert, and Mrs. Grace's level of concern for her feline friend was perfectly justified. Cat owners were fuming at the less than enthusiastic response by the police. "Not a top priority," the papers quoted Detective Constable Benjamin Kingsley, but it was abnormal enough to grab the local media's attention. Bernard was 16, and therefore getting on somewhat in cat years. He was slightly overweight, he was blind in one eye, and never roamed too far away from the house. Most days Bernard could be found sitting on top Mr. Grace's rather expensive saloon car, gliding his claws along the roof, which was Geoffrey Grace's biggest annoyance in life. He did not like that cat one bit. It sat there with a gormless expression, and he swore he knew what it was thinking. The cat thought it was untouchable, higher up the food chain than him, and it could do whatever it jolly well pleased. Mrs. Grace had a lot of time on her hands since her 3 children had left home and rarely visited, so she filled her time with hobbies. In an attempt to fill the void, she had taken a trip to the nearby animal shelter. That November night, the moon was full and riding high, casting a blue eerie glow. The great white orb in the sky provided visibility superior to any street lamp. Crunch, crunch. Then the noise stopped. Marion Grace took a couple more steps. Crunch, crunch. The noise stopped again. It appeared whatever was making the footsteps in the distance would only move a couple of steps after she had done so. If this were the case, then whatever the distance between her and whoever was out there, they would eventually end up meeting in the middle. "You can play this silly game another time. It's getting late and I want you indoors where I can keep an eye on you," she said abruptly. She was beginning to lose her temper and took another few strides. Crunch, crunch. The noise was louder now, but as she peered into the moonlit darkness, she couldn't see any cat-like shape, shadow, or outline. A few more steps, then a couple more. Marion Grace stood right outside the entrance to her drive, isolated from her house, and not a soul in sight. Bewildered, she pondered, surely, if they were both on the same course, then we should have met by now, unless the other party was moving in a circle instead of a straight line. Marion gasped and threw her hand over her mouth. If that were the case, then the other individual would end up approaching from the rear. Crunch, crunch. Realizing she had been lured to a particular spot, she turned around to face whatever had come from behind. She was met instantly by an appendage which clasped her neck. Frozen in shock, Mrs. Grace dropped the box of cat kibble, wishing and hoping that someone had heard and would come running to her aid, but at the same time knowing that this was most unlikely. Her husband was old, but a man of importance on a board of a successful company, and currently away on business. She was over 100 meters away from a telephone, and miles away from another house. With a leathery grip, the attacker held her head back so she couldn't look straight ahead. She peered down as much as her vision would allow, but it was blurred by 2 large glaring circular lights. She could only make out her attacker's huge forehead with rough, abrasive skin, if indeed it was skin. As the numbness of shock lessened, panic began to set in, and a rush of heat surged to her head. Sound diminished, and her vision gradually dimmed and faded black as she passed out. Calm had finally descended until Friday afternoon's PE lesson arrived. "What in blue blazes do you think you're doing? Look before you pass, you idiot!" the Rottweiler screeched in a North London accent from the top of his lungs. His face was now a deep crimson, and his forehead was covered in protruding veins. He continued to scream at the players, brandishing a clipboard with notes and diagrams, which he tried to tear in half out of frustration, and when he couldn't, he slammed it to the ground, jumping up and down on it. Gary Tyler, also known as the Rottweiler, was the meanest, most ruthless, and most competitive physical education teacher of all time. He was in his late 30s, tall and quite muscular, with a slight paunch. He was bald except for a little bit of hair either side, which he kept very short. "That's it, Hunter! That's what I like to see! Good job!" he praised the Montero boy as he kicked the ball through another player's legs and then dodged a member of the opposing team. Gary Tyler yelled again, "See what I mean? You need to read the opposition's movements and second-guess what they're going to do." Once again, Hunter was golden boy of the class, and Blaine came a close second. Blaine just didn't have the killer instinct to succeed, and his brother did. Mr. Tyler dreamt what it would have been like if the Montero boys' parents had given birth to octuplets instead of twins. Every swim gala, athletics day, and sports match would have been a walk in the park, and 4 times the amount of donations to the school's sports department. He moved his way down the row of boys he had just put into a line, dictating to them like a drill sergeant, looking each pupil in the eye to make sure each and every one of them was giving him their undivided attention. "If we're gonna be champions, we need to look like champions," Mr. Tyler decreed. It was decided at the end of last term, in July, that the football team would be getting brand new sports kits, much to the other department's disgust. Headmaster Timothy Rowland had given in and granted the PE teacher his request. The Darwin Destroyers had made it through the final of the Interschool Football Championship, and this year the Rottweiler was going to bring that trophy home, or his team would die trying. Every time Gary thought he had put together a winning team, the private neighbouring school ruined his plans. Thanks to the exceptional level of success Darwin Grammar was achieving in all areas, parents were more than happy to send their children to this respected school, instead of paying extra tuition costs to send them to the more exclusive institute. Hitting back, Rivermouth Academy had recruited exceptional students from rival schools, giving them free scholarships, hence boosting the school's score averages and winning a lot more awards. More parents were now considering enrolling their children in the academy, but the one thing Rivermouth couldn't achieve was luring the Montero twins over to their side. Their parents could easily afford the tuition, but Hector and Lola Montero really liked the school, and that was why they contributed so much. With no chance of Rivermouth Academy stealing his 2-star players, this was the year he would finally triumph. Mr. Tyler talked for a few minutes about the price of success and what it meant to be a winner, and found himself lost, recalling his glory days when he was their age. With his back towards them, the boys began to chat about the one thing that everyone was talking about, the twins' 15th birthday party this Saturday night. No expense had been spared, the band was booked, and the food was ordered. "It's going to be awesome," one child said. "I heard there's going to be a chocolate fountain, and even Year 11 girls will be there," another boy added. This was the rare occasion when the Montero house doors were thrown open to all. Even the unpopular students were finally going to get a glimpse inside the most expensive house in the area. Hunter stood at the end of the line next to Solomon, and he was looking his usual smug self. He was extremely pleased that his party was the talk of the school. After throwing the party of the century, come Monday, he would walk down the corridors, heralded as their new king. Mason and Blaine were stood at the other end of the line. It had taken Mason 3 days to finally believe that Blaine hadn't told Hunter about his midnight howling. He had come to the conclusion that Hunter must have overheard him and Blaine talking about it, or one of his many spies had overheard one of their conversations. It was only when Blaine slept over and got up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, he startled Mrs. McQueen with her ear against the door and heard for himself a barking and howling type of noise coming from Mason's room. Blaine made him realise that his mum hadn't gone insane. She was actually telling the truth. Now the whole line of students were discussing what they were going to wear to dress and impress, and Blaine was getting nervous about what he was going to say to Abigail after his brother had informed him that she felt the same way as Blaine. All were too engrossed in conversation to realise that Mr. Tyler, the Rottweiler, had finished talking and was breathing angrily, snorting through his nostrils at them. The chatter came to an abrupt stop when one breath became more like a snarl, but it was too late. The teacher's big shiny forehead became more and more like a road map as his veins appeared and his face changed back to crimson. His eyes bulged out as if they were on stalks, and it looked for a minute as if the clipboard was going to turn into dust between his vice-like grip. Everyone braced themselves for impact when they saw Mr. Tyler's left eye twitch. This was a sign that he had reached boiling point, and his torrent of fury was about to be unleashed. Up went his clipboard, soaring above their heads, and it started to rain A4-sized pieces of confetti. "Well, excuse me, ladies. When you're quite finished worrying about what you're going to wear, if your ankles are going to look fat," he yelled in a mocking tone, "you may want to remember that we have a championship match around the corner to train for." Shouting so loudly, tears appeared in his eyes. "I have a good mind to give my buddy, Headcase Harrington, a call to come and sort you lot out," he threatened. When he finally ran out of steam, he instructed them to run 5 laps around the school field, since they had so much energy. After all, he wouldn't want them not to be able to fit into their party dresses for the big day. Lighting a match in a room full of gunpowder is asking for trouble, and never a good idea. Then a husky boy named Toby Williams proceeded to make a mistake far worse than that. "Excuse me, sir," the round-faced pupil said. "I'm not even on the football team and—" The flames of anger reignited in the Rottweiler's eyes before the overweight pupil could continue. Once again his condescending voice escalated and roared. "Oh, looks like we have a wise guy. I suppose it's my fault you never tried out for the team, is it?" The short boy's eyes became watery. "No, sir. I mean," he nervously muttered. "You can give me 6 laps," Mr. Tyler barked. Toby closed his eyes, hoped for the best, and blurted, "I have a dentist appointment in 20 minutes, and I have to leave now." Mr. Tyler couldn't believe the insolence of this child. "You can give me 7 laps, and you better run fast then," he yelled. Toby Williams, scared to death, turned and ran as fast as he could. At this rate he would miss the party and be running laps all through the weekend. The race began around the field. They all started at the great oak tree. Every time they had gone around the goalposts at the other end and then touched the trunk of the tree, it qualified as a lap. Every time they had to run laps, it was the same, and all the kids ran in the standard formation. Hunter led, Solomon was second, and then there was a gap, followed by everyone else, from a safe distance. No one ever made an attempt to catch up with the front and try to beat the two. That was just how it was, and always had been. "I'm sick of this pathetic charade," Mason said in disgust. "Everyone is too afraid of Hunter to stand up to him and his bodyguard, and we end up fueling his ego." "Careful, Mason," Blaine warned. "Just let it go and enjoy the comfortable pace." Mason had had enough of the constant teasing and Hunter waving his continuous success in Mason's face. He decided that it was time he acted, and that time was now. Thinking back to his radical theory of all the mice in the area teaming up to take on the cats and drive them out of town, he had an idea. "Guys, listen up," Mason said. "Surely there must be one amongst us that can beat them. There are more of us than them. We can do it. Let's take back the school." All of a sudden the back of the pack picked up the pace and started advancing towards the leaders, taking it easy. "Hey Hunter, looks like we've got some competition," Solomon jokingly informed him. Hunter whipped his head back to see the stragglers gaining, led by Mason McQueen. "Looks like Queenie wants to try and take my crown. He really ought to know his place by now," he scoffed. Whilst the race for school supremacy took place, Mr. Tyler had managed to assemble the pieces of paper that he had thrown up in the air after his last tantrum back onto his clipboard, and as he glanced up to make sure nobody cut the track, he saw the commotion. This change in pattern was enough of an irregularity to make him put down his clipboard and take note. "Must be a sale on lipstick somewhere," he teasingly suggested to himself, and sat back on his fold-out patio chair to enjoy the show. As each lap took its toll, several boys grew tired and retreated back into a slow jog. When it was the final lap to go, only 2 were left. Mason and Blaine, who wasn't bothered. He was saving his energy for swim practice later on in the evening. As Mason closed the gap, Blaine began to sense that this was not going to end well. Now a close third, Mason hammered down the first straight and became level with Solomon. It was difficult to pass this juggernaut due to his sheer width, and he could tell that Solomon was letting him get close, only to then push him off the track, or even trample him. They approached the goalposts, and Mason saw his chance. Bluffing, making Solomon think he was going to overtake on the outside lane, the stocky boy tried to block, Mason managed to sneak into the inside lane and overtake Hunter's right-hand man. Solomon was fast, but he didn't have enough energy to catch up, and now there was just one opponent left, Hunter, the Shark, Montero. Mr. Tyler was now on the edge of his seat, basking in the excitement of the race, resisting the urge to blink, in case he missed a single moment. The failing boys were cheering as Mason reduced the gap between second and first, and now it was on to the final straight. Being a typical average student, Mason had given up trying to be the best, as it clearly wasn't going to happen. But what he realised was that when you're a teenager, you are constantly growing and changing all the time, and not noticing the subtle changes. For Mason, living on the outskirts of town with his lack of transportation meant he would have to sprint to school if he missed his lift, and he had to cover a great distance to visit Blaine, who lived on the west side of town. This year, he had discovered that his stamina had greatly increased, and he had become a lot faster. As the two boys powered down the final straight, they were now side by side, and the only question now was, who was going to take home the glory? Mason's legs were now feeling like jelly, but he willed them to keep going. He glanced briefly at Hunter's face, which was red and sweaty. He could see that Hunter had clearly reached his limit. This lifted Mason's spirit, and his adrenaline soared. As if by magic, he got a second wind, and his legs felt strong again. He now edged just in front of Hunter, and he was almost to the tree where he would be able to celebrate. His fallen comrades would join him as they taunted his arch-rival and finally brought justice back to Darwin Grammar. Then, in a single moment, his hopes turned into failure as Blaine's prophecy came true. As Hunter saw the boy who constantly challenged him take the lead, the whole history of the rivalry between them flashed before his eyes. "Not today, not ever," he thought as he ground together his Hollywood smile. Powered by sheer determination in his hatred for Mason, he pushed himself harder than he had ever pushed before, until they were once again neck and neck. It looked like it was destined to be a photo finish. "Careful, May. Mind you don't get a stitch," Hunter yelled in the last 20 metres. He swung his long reaching elbow down and over Mason's side and caught him straight in the gut. All the air left Mason's body with a whoosh, and his entire strength along with it. There was nothing left to do, as his legs buckled, and he saw the tree in front of him fall out of sight. He nosedived onto the grass hard, and skidded to a halt a few metres short of the finish. "Good heavens! School is a vicious place. Someone should step in and stop this behaviour," Mr. Tyler said with an intake of breath as he picked up his clipboard and went back to reassessing formation tactics. "Someone really should," he exclaimed. By the time Blaine had reached the finish, Mason was still on the wet, muddy ground, trying to catch his breath. His best friend offered him a shoulder to lean on as he picked him up, but this wasn't the best of ideas, as Blaine's shoulders were very high up, so he had to awkwardly lean to one side to balance him. As the bell sounded the end of school for a week, the pupils on the field scattered to grab their things. Hunter and Solomon strode off, walking past Mason and Blaine as they hobbled along, blissful in the knowledge that Mason, even though, through all his efforts, had finished in last place, even behind Toby. The Rottweiler had successfully devised his strategy when Hunter approached. "Another victory, I see, Hunter. Might not want to cut it so close next time," he commented. As Hunter passed his teacher, he decided if any teacher were to divulge any secrets about taboo subjects, it was Mr. Tyler. Hunter, inflating the Rottweiler's ego, asked, "So, sir, the old janitor, Brian Harrington, I bet you realised he was up to no good, and it was thanks to you that he never got a chance to hurt anyone." The flattery had done its job, and in an instant Mr. Tyler disclosed all he knew. "I would have noticed. Nothing gets past my eagle eyes," he informed Hunter. "I wasn't working here then. I heard he used to bark and growl, chasing animals off the school field. The guy was a complete nutter. But when the police found him in the janitor's closet, what they found wasn't pretty." Intrigued by the mystery, Hunter became more and more obsessed with the circumstances surrounding this individual, and sensed that a dark truth was behind this urban legend.